Yeah, this is like reading between the lines that are already between the lines a little bit here. What you can take from her statement is that she's trying to signal that they're lining up a bunch of deals with countries other than China. And you can deduce from that, if you want to make the leap, that they're sort of signaling that'll put pressure on China to go to the table. Of course, we have no indication that those talks are scheduled or even that there's any interest in them. Trump has signaled that he wants China to pick up the phone and call him. The reporting from our friends in Asia are that that's not likely and not really how things work. So there's a bit of a standoff here. But there's some other reporting today from Politico that they're advancing on some sort of potential tariff-type framework. I'm using the term purposefully loosely here, with Japan, in addition to the progress they announced yesterday on India, and that the White House wants to sort of announce some of these deals, in particular with sort of large regional economies near China, to create this sort of force on it. Now, where that leaves us, we don't know. In the meantime, remember, so many of those electronic goods are exempt, but they're only exempt because Trump intends to hit them with a separate tariff. Presumably, maybe that's up for negotiation as well, although the White House has signaled otherwise, saying that those sectoral tariffs are stickier, if you will, than the across-the-board country tariffs, which seem to change pretty frequently here. So a lot of mixed signals here on this one, but the latest from the White House is sort of like, look, they're prioritizing other deals to put pressure on China to get to the table, but there's just no sign yet that they're near it.
Well, certainly the deals that you mentioned with the other countries are obviously very important, but the 145% on tariffs on China are extremely important, I think many would say.
Yep.
Josh, given what you've reported, what we know about how the president feels about the relationship between the U.S. and China, what would progress look like? I'm not asking for like what the final trade deal would look like, but what does the president want to see?
I mean, a lot of the analysts say that the progress would be something in the realm of what he had in term one. He liked that sort of called phase one trade deal. China got traction with the Trump administration then by pledging, for instance, increased purchases of American agriculture products for farmers. Now, I should note, Secretary Bessent, according to the reporting from our colleagues Daniel Flatley and others, saying purportedly behind this, behind closed doors at this event, according to their sources, our colleagues' sources, that this basically amounts to a trade embargo, right? The numbers are so high right now that virtually no one is paying them. And there's other reporting from other outlets today about how stores and, let's kids' toy stores, that kind of thing, are trying to deal with this. And the answer is they're running down their stock and trying to figure out how long they can last. So I think right now the terms of what the U.S. wants are broader market access in China. And of course, the North Star for Trump in all of these, which is why he came up with that sort of unusual calculation that came up with these tariffs in the first place, is the trade deficit. He wants a narrower balance in trade deficit. He's very fixated and focused on that point. Of course, many economists outside, particularly those outside the White House, you have a hard time finding anyone that would say anything other than trade deficits between those economies, given the way they're structured, are almost inevitable. Trump wants to change that, so I think some level of tariff, the U.S. is going to want that to stay there. And I should note there's more bipartisan support for tariffs on China, so he's got more runway, I think, on this one than on the other tariffs, which really did have sort of more objections coming from Congress than we've seen in the past week or so.
I'm curious, Josh, about the role of U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, that this headline came out of this meeting with him. What is ultimately his role? Because, I mean, bottom line, it's President Trump who's going to decide, right, where we go in terms of tariffs. But I am curious what seems to be a growing or greater role, it feels like day by day, of the Treasury Secretary.
Yeah, certainly. He seems to have gathered a larger role here. And, we've had other members of Trump's trade team standing at this very camera and insisting that they are all singing from the same song sheet and marching in the same direction. And, let's it'll take them at their word on that, I suppose. But Bessent is definitely, both publicly and in our reporting privately, on the more moderate end of this spectrum. Now, Trump's spectrum is a pretty hawkish trade spectrum, right? Yeah. A lot of his aides are sort of all hawkish to varying degrees. But Bessent is definitely on the more moderate end. To have him as the face of these talks with foreign countries is, I suppose, can be interpreted as a signal that they want to get to a deal on this. Some of the more extreme hawkish voices, of course, chief among them, Peter Navarro, an avowed both China hawk and just tariff guy generally. I think he would be a different landscape than dealing with Secretary Bessent. But again, I would say all those members of the team say that they're kind of trying to sing from the same song sheet. I should note, though, there was a story last week in the Wall Street Journal, very interesting, saying that Secretary Bessent and Secretary Lutnick got Trump to make his big tariff change on April 9th when the China number went up and, 5 dozen other numbers went down. by doing it when Navarro wasn't in the room. So I can't speak to that other than that's what the Journal is reporting, but that is one dynamic potentially to keep an eye on here.
Any timeline? Just 30 seconds here, Josh, in terms of what happens between U.S. and China. Do we have any little step forward really quickly?
None at all, really, is the short answer. The slightly longer one is they have meetings with 34 countries, Leavitt said today this week. We don't know what those are, but it didn't sound like they were China.